All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tea and Type. I'm JB Pagden, and tonight I'm hanging out with my friend Margaret Owen.
Howdy,
Tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margaret Owen, as you may have gleaned. This is my first time on a sort of a live YouTube show, so wish me luck or breaking legs. Anyway, relevant stuff. So I'm a debut author. My debut YA fantasy, The Merciful Crow, comes out in spring 2019 as currently projected. And I'm here, I believe, to talk about world building and all kinds of fun stuff.
Yeah. And we were both in PitchWars 2015.
Mhm.
So is Crow your PitchWars book?
It is not. So for all the folks out there who are working on, novel or manuscript number 2, number 5, I have one like dedicated manuscript in, sort of on a shelf, and I have garbage bags full of fan fiction that are just, those are also under my belt. So, keep writing for sure.
Yeah. And Molly is represented by, tell us your little extra details and then
Oh,
we'll
sure.
move forward.
Yeah.
Because
Some
that's
of you,
exciting too. That recently happened. So.
some of you might have also gleaned that Molly is a name that I answer to.
Oh, sorry.
So no, it's totally cool. Insider info, 99% of the time I go by Molly. The TSA does not think that's funny or an appropriate nickname for Margaret, but they've had the deal, and so have I. Uh, yeah, I signed with Victoria Marini, my fabulous agent, back in April, I want to say. And even the deal for Merciful Crow was signed, or sort of formally announced at the end of October. We technically sold it back in like early July, end of June. So I've been sitting on that one for a while. But yeah, that's kind of skinny. I live in Seattle. I have 2 cats who are probably going to interrupt this podcast at some point, or
Yes, we're counting on it.
right. One is attempting to right now. Yeah, you can definitely see his ears. Yep. Hi, Boo Boo. But yeah.
All right, awesome. So the reason I wanted to have you on, besides just you're my friend and I want to chat with you, is that your book is so beautifully done. Have spent the last week reading it, and I feel so lucky to have gotten to do that. And as I tweeted and wrote about in my review, it's masterful. The world building is, I mean, I would put it up there in my top like 5 fantasy world building world built books or something. That's not very articulate, but it's awesome. And so one thing that's so impressive to me, and you all will all see this when you read The Merciful Crow eventually, is that there is no detail left unthought out. And as we were texting about, we were sort of jokingly talking about in Lord of the Rings how in Minas Tirith, how did they get rid of sewage, right? Like there's small details in like epic high fantasy that aren't actually considered. And not that your book, obsesses over those details, but you have the sense when I say expert world building that even those small things are figured out. And so I'm going to just tie this monologue off and hand it over to you and say, when you're thinking about world building, how do you first come at it? And then kind of how would you recommend for other people if they're just starting fresh,
Mm-hmm.
And don't just say poop. If you start there, then we're just done.
Dang it!
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I told you, I warned you. The first question was going to be, where does the poop go?
It's
but
an excellent question.
You're right. The super glamorous question. We're gonna lead with the winner. But I was actually thinking about this. Over the last couple of days, when you sit down and think, "Oh my God, I actually have to talk about this stuff," and I realized the perfect way to describe world building, as far as I guess the amount, the proportion, is to think of it like almost salt. Because I literally have a running note on my iPhone that's just labeled world building salt, and it's just fun stuff to sprinkle in or bigger ideas, and it sort of sets the tone for how or for the plot. It forms this base to draw out the real flavor of the plot. but it shouldn't be overwhelming. Like, no one should be eating spoonfuls of salt. And so, like, in that same way, no one should be just buried under your world building, because it's not the story. And so when I'm approaching world building and, you know, figuring out the worlds that my stories are set in, one thing I try to do is develop that concurrently with the story, like the plot itself. I am the opposite of a pantser. I have just like, I would not call myself the Leslie Knope of world building.
Binders on binders. I have binders.
Yeah.
I make binders.
Exactly. Like, only because I don't print out the binders, but I think I have like, I have just oodles and oodles, like, let's see, sort of standard documentation for for a story is a world document where it's just like, here's the belief system, here's the deities they believe in, here's the holidays associated with that, here's what that looks like for a rich person, here's what that looks like for a poor person. I have an actual plot document, and as I'm developing that, that's just sort of a grand outline of the story. But, you know, if you need, like, if you have something in the plot where it needs a festival, for example, oh, hey, you know, maybe I should have that recording, maybe I can pull that straight out of the world building document. And I have Excel spreadsheets that are just like, how does the calendar work? You know, does it have, I'm working in a world that has 3 seasons, and that is very strange. I don't know if I like it yet.
Your new one?
And they're not even like, they're kind of, they're named after the belief system has 9 deities that are titans. It has I think what is it, 4 downfalls. So those are like the almost like the cardinal evils, and then sort of in the middle it has things that are called the 3 temptations.
Nice.
Thank you. And so you have ambition, desire, and vengeance as the 3 temptations. As they're not necessarily bad things, but they're not great things. Like, they're things that could lead you to one of the downfalls. Yeah. And each season is named after one of those. So you have the ambition season, the desire season, and the vengeance season.
Yep.
Which I am very, very happy about. I mean, like, I like it just from like that sounds cool standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I world build, and I also have a running thing on my phone, and I do it simultaneously, but I am nowhere near as organized or as cataloged as you are. And I think that I'm going to try that in my next fantasy because I think it's useful, but because, as you know, we were talking about before this call, you know, it helps, like, culture pulls from that as well. Yes. And maybe you want to give that holiday example, but I find that, like, this salt that you're talking about, I have the big stuff, you know, and I have statues, but I need more salt, you know, in like the ordinary interactions. And I think that that's a really helpful way to think about this. But I do love, like, I think of it as this intense outline of world building. There's gods, there's this, and there's that, and it's true to life. But anyways, you want to give your holiday example?
Oh, sure. Let me think of. I'm trying to think of a non-spoilery example.
Or just use the Christmas or the holiday season, you know?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. So one thing that I think really helps to think about with world building, like we were talking about earlier, is the extent to which, or like religion and I guess the extent to which, like, different religions sort of permeate our lives. And this is sort of a worldwide thing, but I think most of the folks tuning in are going to be Americans. If we think about the extent to which, you know, as a culture, we see Christianity pop up. If you sort of start to become aware of, you know, different rituals that are associated with it. Like, if someone sneezes, you say, bless you. And I mean, what does that actually mean? Where does that come from? Or, you know, the example I gave earlier where, you know, you have two or when we were talking earlier, you have 2 atheists, you know, sitting in a cafe, and one says, oh my God, this chocolate cake is amazing. And the other one says, amen.
Yeah.
And neither of them believe that, believe in that, but both of them have that foundational understanding of what they mean.
Yeah.
And so, if you are if you are looking to world build, or to construct something, I think your first step is to identify the extent to which your culture shapes your everyday experience. And then sort of use that as a stepping ladder, like to say, all right, so maybe we don't have so in this world, there is no Christmas, but what do we do instead?
Yeah.
And if you have, like, depending on what your religion believes, like, does it believe that the sun is a giant bird that flies around the world? And if it does, and there's a period of time when the sun is far away, the sun goes away for a while, how does your world's religion answer that, or how does it explain that?
Also, what do you think of birds? Are they somehow, I mean, it has all these
You're
other
right.
implications too.
Exactly. Like, if you think that the sun is a giant bird, then are birds a holy symbol, or are they are they fake suns? Are they failed suns? Where did birds come from? What made the birds? And honestly, when you think about any sort of phenomenon, like a natural phenomenon, and think of like a creation story for that, that is it's almost like the seed from which your entire world can grow. Yeah. If you were to answer, where did an earthquake, or let's say a giant earthquake strikes a city, and it's your world's equivalent of 5 BC. Everyone's going to try to figure out what god they just made super mad, and why.
Yeah. So actually, I do have a question about something in your book that I hope is not a spoiler, and I think it's fair knowledge that there are mammoths in your world, right?
People have been very excited about the mammoths. Yeah.
So I actually was wondering about that, because in terms of timelines, like it doesn't feel and it doesn't read like a prehistoric world, right? And so, but you made this decision to keep this creature, and I was wondering, why did you do that? And when you're adding, I don't know. This is just a fangirl question. Why did you do that?
It's totally,
You wanted to do? I mean,
totally legit.
Yeah.
I think the initial root of that was, that's cool. But then you have to figure out, how does that work? How far, what do you need to exist in order for mammoths to exist?
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got, something that's basically it's the rough draft of an elephant, and it's got
Oh my god, that's my favorite new thing ever.
Thank you. It's a furry giant, mammal, and so you've got to think about stuff like, what's it going to eat? What is it? How much exercise does it need? Where do you keep the mammoth? Where back to the winning question, where does the poo go? Like, all these things are like logistical questions. And this also goes back to the salt stuff. We're gonna bring it all full circle. Nobody wants to spend more than 2 sentences thinking about mammoth poo, or thinking about, we don't need the entire description of the system for which mammoths are maintained and cared for. We just need to know that it's plausible. If you put mammoths in a very, very tropical environment. If mammoths show up on a second world version, and second world as in totally separate Earths, that you've made yourself, a second world version of Hawaii, mammoths are not going to make sense, both biologically and the reader's going to be saying, isn't that mammoth going to die of heat stroke in about 30 seconds? And yeah, the answer is yes, that poor thing is definitely going to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's one of the things that's sort of great and terrible about world building is you'll be barraged by cool ideas all the time. It's just about keeping track of them and figuring out how they work.
I think that's it significantly. I know Megan and I have talked about in other episodes on world building, this notion of you're only showing part of your iceberg and there's so much beneath that you can inform other things. But where I think your work stands out and what I hope we're getting across here is that there must be an interconnected web, and it must be like, it's not just, hey, I want to put a mammoth in, or how about a pterodactyl? It's got to be, what else do I need for this to exist here? And further, what are the, going forward implications either for our characters or for the world, or, whatever it might be. And I think if you can figure those out and answer them in a reasonable way, you can keep the mammoth, I do agree in a tropical setting, you're straining credulity, but I think in your book, it works beautifully and it absolutely just flows, and that's because you've considered all of these other little ways that it comes together. I would love to see your spreadsheet someday.
They're enormous. Well, and one of the things, this isn't too much of a spoiler, the magic system in the book that's coming out in 2019, The Merciful Crow, is
we'll probably have you back on again when it's time to promote your book.
Oh my god, I'm still not over it. At some point I will be cool about it. Maybe like, oh yeah, I've got my 17th book coming out. That's not today. That's I'm still just like so the magic system, we were talking about this earlier. The word magic shows up twice in the manuscript, but people are throwing fire around. They're, tracking people down like a bloodhound. They're, like magic exists, but it's referred to as birthrights. And one of those spreadsheets that I'm talking about lists out every cast, every birthright that cast gets, the forms it takes. Like, if one cast has an affinity for, or like the owls actually is. If as long as they stay in, we'll see. They're what they consider a birthright, which is their magic power. Basically, is a perfect memory. They can commit something to memory, and it is there forever. But for different people, that might show up in different ways. Like they might be able to commit every note in a song to memory.
Cool.
Or they might be, they can record it with and recite it with perfect pitch. Or they might be able to commit every word of a book, like an entire book, to memory. Or they might be able to commit an entire image in perfect memory. So it's not, there's some flexibility there.
But that's so cool, right? Because here's the trait, solid trait. Here's the variation depending on a person. And out of that arises characters and plot and so many, all of your 17 sequels.
Oh my. But I guess where I was going with that is that where was I going with that?
Sorry.
Birthrights, right? So it's still considered a birthright, and it still informs that particular group of people's opinions and the way that they view things. So if you have someone who can, commit every musical piece in the world, or that they come across to perfect memory, wouldn't they get kind of bored of it at some point? And one of the things that is, I think, very subtle way to saturate the world is to have someone like that who is just you flesh out the world to your characters too. Of you have a character who remembers every musical piece, and they're walking through a marketplace listening to the busker on the corner just absolutely butcher it and just cringing the entire time. And you at that point have two simultaneous things. You have the marketplace, and you're also, you're fleshing out the setting of the marketplace, but you also have the characterization of the person who is who was just cringing and just dying inside listening to this awful Wonderwall, rendition.
Yes.
And it at the same time, you're also that is also world building, because it's part of it's how that specific thing affects them. It's at that point it's salt, though. It's it's the salt that draws out the flavor, but it's not shoveling the spoonful, just piles and piles of world building into something. It's actually affecting the scene at that time.
Yeah.
I need to call my editor. Maybe we need someone who remembers every piece of music in the world.
All right. I think that's lovely. I think that is one thing that stood out to me in your book, and I hope I convey that in my Goodreads review, is just this brilliant combination of narration and characterization, or description and characterization. There's this one moment, and I won't talk about it in specifics. It's part of like narration, but it's backstory and exposition all in like 2 crisp sentences that made me go, oh, what that? And
I'm gonna have to ask you which one this is, because I'm so curious.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of moments like that, and I think sometimes when I, even when I read PitchWars manuscripts, or like, we're looking, I mean, you see often someone walks into a market and their personality just disappears. It's just sights and sounds, and
right.
And I think the next step, and your book is written in third person close, right? But even without that, like even in a first person point of view, you're still smelling things, taking things in unique to you and how you do it. And so I think that's, again, I think people should buy your book as a writing tutorial as well as a fantasy novel. But I mean, but that is exactly what you're talking about. And you couldn't do that if you didn't know your world, and you couldn't do that if you didn't know your characters. And so I do advocate, we got to wrap up here. This is only supposed to be 15 minutes, but we always go over. That's fine. I mean, I'll talk to you all night. It's but I would like to say, down in the show notes, I included your world building worksheet, which just kind of, you walk people through an example, right, of what happens in a society, I think, where people worship light. Is that right?
Right. I think Sheena was talking about, how to thoughts on how to really world build with the religion. And that was one where I just sort of took it and ran.
Right.
And it's questions that you have to think about as far as when you're developing a belief system, how that impacts everyone's daily life. Which, going full circle again, an example that I was thinking about this afternoon was, even if you have like we'll set the lightest example aside, because I think people will be able to read that with the thing. But let's take a religion where hygiene is super important, or where you have cleanliness is next to godliness. So what does that look like? And this is how you world build from a statement like that. You say, all right, so they believe
here, by the way.
Okay. Awesome. Work in progress. We'll see. But you say, okay, so cleanliness is an ideal that people strive for. What do they consider clean? Is that, do they bathe with oils? Do they bathe with water? Do they bathe with dust? How do they do that? Do they believe in shampoo? Is shampoo even a thing? Where do they get their soap? Because soap is, or soap making, folks, look it up. It is nightmarish. It's I think at the time it was like animal fat, and or large amounts of it. And where do you get that? Who has money for that? I mean, I invented an easy and accessible method for them to have soap in the Merciful Crow, because I did not want to deal with it.
So rich, like it adds so much, and it gives you like something. Yeah, I mean, it's.
And that's just, the sort of the kind of way that things sort of build from that, is this idea, okay, you want a society that believes in cleanliness. Okay, is it in the middle of a meadow, or or of like a plains? Is it on the coast? Is it by a river? Do they have a water source that is plentiful enough that they're not going to totally destroy it by having how many, hundreds of thousands of people go in and bathe multiple times a day? What about the water carry disease? Would that just totally wipe out a city? would if what do they do in the winter? There's a how do they stay clean in the winter, or in just in the cold seasons in general, and can a poor man afford to stay clean? And if not, is at that point, do they consider poverty itself an association with unholiness?
Yeah.
And how does that affect, like, does your character believe that? Does your main character believe that? Or do they think that's totally ridiculous? And if they are that contradictory, or if they're in such contradiction with their with such a core tenet belief, how does that inform how they interact with other characters who may or may not be more, just as devout, or as devout or less devout? If you have someone who's just like Pigpen from the Peanuts and does not want to bathe, is terrified of water, and believes that they're every bit as holy or divine as anyone else, how does that affect their interaction with a very wealthy woman who is very germ-phobic? How does that go down? And the answer would be hilariously.
Right. So I mean, in this though, and I love watching, like, hearing your mind work through some of these, because I think you consider questions that are not necessary. I mean, they seem intuitive once you say them, but I mean, I don't, the world's like that. And I think that's, and also always this question of like poor and rich, I think, which is going to be something that maybe shows up in many of your books. But I mean, that's a great question. Like, as you're building social strata, like, looking at this key element and then thinking about how different people from different class levels, approach it. There's so much, I mean, there's a plot right there, and there's characters to be found among that, and there's tensions to be, put into play. And so, yeah, I think it's great. Okay. You're welcome. I've got a book to recommend to you after this call. Because in an earlier episode, I did a whole history of toilet paper, because I love learning about things like this.
I definitely have a book that is the world history of salt.
Oh, I read that. Yeah. See, that's going to turn into another history lesson. Megan always makes fun of me for those. And speaking of recommendations, one thing we always do at the end of the call is a recommendation: book, movie, game you're playing. Ooh. I don't know, sometimes Megan recommends sleep or fresh air. So I don't know, do you have any recommendations for people?
Okay, let's see. I just read the book Iron Cast by Destiny. I think it's Soria. It's fantastic. Definitely would put that one down. It is it's another one where the magic system is really cool. Like, it's set in the tail end of the Roaring 20s, or no, right before the Roaring 20s. But it's in this world where, I mean, it's still the U.S. It's an alternate version of the U.S. where there are people who have what's been classified as a bloodborne disease, but it seems like it's almost like I would say, it's the weirdest form of iron deficiency I've ever seen. It's basically like magic anemia, but they don't suffer from iron deficiency, but they have very violent reactions to it. But they also have the ability to influence people, like their emotions or different abilities based through different forms of art. So like reading poetry, you can convince someone of anything.
Cool.
Right?
That sounds amazing. Okay, it's called Iron Cast.
And it's also big ups for an amazing female friendship. It is just, I could not give this one. I would give 3 thumbs up if I had them. I would volunteer my cat, but he's for once asleep. Right? Oh God, he's such a monster.
Okay, awesome. Well, I would recommend your book, which I spent the week reading. I put a note to the Goodreads link in, so you can add it on Goodreads. It's in the show notes. I would also recommend, when life gets too stressful, just binge watch The British Baking Show. That's what we've been doing in our house all week long. I got
my mom on that, and my mom was blowing up my phone for like the past few weeks, and I was like, "Hey, Mom, I've got a recommendation for you. It's The Great British Bake Off." And then I got, "Oh my God, this show is great," and then silence. So nice, so good,
expertly deployed,
right?
That's pretty amazing. Also great for getting rid of people who call you too much or, making you feel better or want to pay. All right. All right,
Yes.
everybody. So that is Tea and Type for tonight. And Megan will be back next week. She's been moving, but join us next week, Monday, 8 o'clock Central, 9 o'clock Eastern. And thank you so much, Margaret Owen, for joining us. And we'll, look forward to hearing more about your book soon.
Thank you for having me.
Bye, guys. Don't hang up, though. I'm going to talk to you in just a minute.
Okay.
Hang on.